Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Woodtech Biochar podcast. If you've heard of biochar, you will know it's a form of captured and sequestered carbon with great co-benefits. You may be familiar with us Joneses on social media. Perhaps you've met one of us at one of our many open days. Or this is the first time you've seen what we're doing with biochar. We always share what we find out on our journey of using biochar, whether it's experimenting with biochar, making biochar, or manufacturing technology to produce biochar. We like to show both good and the bad, helping others not make the same mistakes we've made. Having seen that podcasts are a great way to get out information and spread the word, I must apologize in advance, as we are complete amateurs when it comes to podcasts, and myself as a host, well, I can barely pronounce my words, so just think of me as a carbon negative Jonathan Ross and we'll be fine. For the first episode, myself, Darren Jones and Mick Jones, we invite Connor Lascelles of Earthly Biochar Industries and Dan Wrench from Shropshire Council Climate Task Force. Having known both Connor and Dan for years, I can vouch that they are in biochar for the good of biochar. Their enthusiasm is only matched by their commitment and care of how to handle the growing UK biochar industry. I asked what biochar means to you individually, how you got involved in biochar ethics, and a general discussion of topics we feel need to be talked about openly. So today myself, Darren Jones and Mick Jones from Woodtech Biochar, we're joined by Connor Lascelles from Earthly Biochar and Dan Wrench from Shropshire Council. And the reason I have these three people here today is I think they are generally in biochar for the good of biochar. Collectively here you have a great mix of experience. The first question I want to say is, what is biochar? Now, if you Google what is biochar, or you look on any website for a new company that started up this week, created by Chatbot or anybody's social media, they will say something like, biochar is a charcoal-like substance that's made by heating organic material from agricultural and forestry waste. Or our own website says, poorly written, biochar is a carbon-rich, charcoal-like powdery material. Don't know why I copy and pasted that from when we did it 4 years ago. It is produced from renewable biomass using a high heat, low oxygen burning process called pyrolysis. The way we see it is depending on the end use, the process, and the person using the biochar is something different to everybody. So I wanted to ask you, what is biochar to you based on your own experience? So start with Connor. What is biochar to you? What is biochar?
Yeah, so I think, because this is they call it the oldest thing you've never heard of, so although it's historically thousands of years old, it's still new in our terminology. So we have to realise that there is no agreed universal definition of biochar. We have some people that say biochar is charcoal made at a high temperature and then inoculated with biology. That's where the bio comes from. And if it's not inoculated, it's just charcoal. But then my personal opinion is that the material made at 550 degrees Celsius and above crosses the threshold at which it becomes durable carbon storage, and biochar made at a lower temperature is not as durable as stored carbon in the soil. So that's sort of the first threshold that I look at, is what temperature was it made at, and then that's what I think is biochar. And if you make it with a set of ethical principles where you're not going and clear cutting ancient woodland to make into biochar, and your production emissions aren't outweighing the carbon savings, and putting all these sort of ethical checklists together, that's my definition of biochar.
That's Earthly Biochar, Connor's definition of biochar.
Stamping it down.
So Dan, what is biochar to you? What would you explain biochar as to somebody?
Well, how can I follow that, really? I mean, Connor's got the kind of a great technical definition there. So if it depends on who I'm talking to, really. I mean, the simplest thing that I say is it's charcoal that you don't burn. It hasn't got you don't call it coal anymore. So, but then, I always associate bio with biological, and I'm quite interested in using biochar in materials to reduce their overall carbon footprint. So, in that circumstance, maybe biochar is the wrong term. So, again, I following Connor, I also think that there are differences with charcoal, the temperature, what you're trying to get from the product in terms of charcoal. You want some of the sort of volatile things that come off there to give the food flavour. You don't want that in biochar, and you want the biochar to last as long as it can in the soil, so that the higher temperature means the greater stability. But if I'm talking to the councillors, it's basically, I say it's charcoal. You can make it with other stuff than lump wood, so you can make it with a whole range of different feedstocks, and you don't burn it at the end.
Yeah, you're using heat.
Yeah, and I don't say burning it as well,
Yeah.
because it's associated with incineration and all that sort of thing. So there's lots of negative connotations when you start saying we're going to burn lots of biomass. In fact, there's that whole campaign, Stop Burning Stuff, isn't there, at the moment, which, I think they're right in many ways.
So it's baking.
It's baking rather than burning. I think that's a different B.
So you'd think Mary Berry's going to be doing a biochar cookbook in a couple of years?
If I was to follow a Mary Berry recipe, it'd probably end up turning it into char rather than a lovely cake.
With activated charcoal, hopefully. That's good for you then. So Mick, what is biochar? To you?
To me, biochar it's not so much what biochar is, it's what biochar can do. And for me, my journey's been more doors opening and seeing more positive effects. And what's exciting about biochar is you can start with biochar, you can feed it to a cow, then it comes out of the cow into the bedding, which improves the health of the bedding, which then improves all the microbiology in that, and then you go on again to the composting, then onto the land, and then because you put all this really well balanced microbiology as a result of the biochar onto the land, you then get microbiology into the crop, which goes back into the cow, and it just ties everything together. So to me, biochar is a wonderful element that actually enhances the soil microbiology and all microbiology and the microbiome work in a circular fashion. And that's what excites me about biochar. Because if you just ask me what biochar is, it is simply we do not combust the material. We just produce black carbon. So it's pure black carbon, and the more pure we can make it, the better. And the higher the temperature you produce it, the longer it will last. So that is what I see biochar as.
And I think the other interesting concept that we learned from trialling biochar on ash trees is it's kind of a catalyst. And I like looking at it like a domino. So you've got healthy soil and you've got dominoes all stacked up in front of you, and biochar is the first domino. If you get that right, knocks down all the rest of it. You get more clover, fixing more nitrogen, that nitrogen feeding the tree.
The further I get along this journey, the more I'm starting to realise I believe that the biochar actually enables the fungi element of the microbiome to operate more effectively against the bacteria, so you get a better balance. And in nature we need a really good balance between fungi and bacteria. It's all very well talking about microbiology in the soil, but if you've got loads of 75% bacteria and 25% fungi, you haven't got soil, you've fundamentally got dirt. It's not going to the plants are not going to be naturally healthy. When you get the really good balance, it just allows the plants to look after themselves, stop themselves getting diseases. If they get a disease, they can combat it. And with ash dieback, it's very similar. If you notice an ash tree, normally underneath the ash tree nothing grows because all the microbiology has gone. And I think the ash in its own sense is one of its worst enemies, because it actually pulls the nutrients out of the ground, more so than a lot of other trees. And I found just by flooding that ground back with nutrients again, suddenly the ash tree becomes healthy, and the ash dieback pathogen doesn't really stand a chance in that environment.
Not sure if people have seen earthy biochar doing the Save the Ash tree, where you're treating with biochar, various sites. I mean, I think the ash dieback could take you could probably have a whole episode just on ash dieback alone, which we'll probably do anyway, because
we'll come to that another time.
Along to all on Connor's journey on that, and we're really happy to be part of that. So our next question is why biochar? So Dan, I'm going to start with you. Why did you end up getting involved in biochar?
Okay, so in 2019 I started a new role at Shropshire Council. I was the county ecologist there, and I moved into the climate change team. And so my remit was carbon storage essentially and nature-based solutions. So I worked with the tree team and to get new tree officers in to do more tree planting, the sort of classic sort of thing. And I've been aware of biochar, but not much detail. So I was quite interested in that because it seemed to be an up and coming and well established almost by then way of carbon storage. And I've looked at others like enhanced rock weathering and direct air capture and thought actually biochar seems to have a lot of co-benefits. So I went to an event led by the Energy and Bioproducts Research Institute at Aston University, and I found that very interesting. Things were progressing. They had a machine that they were trialling, and I felt that it was something that us as a local authority we could get involved in, either promote ourselves or actually get our own unit, and so saving our protected sites. Really, a lot of our protected sites, if you talk to conservation volunteers, for example, a lot of what they do is scrub clearance, because a lot of the best bits of land that are left remaining in our countryside are bits that are hard to farm, essentially. So the farmers haven't spread fertiliser and pesticides all over them, and they've traditionally just grazed them at low intensity, and they tend to be suffering because a lot of the grazing levels are going down now, and sometimes there's no grazing stock to keep on top of scrub and the dense vegetation. So a lot of our best sites, particularly some of our limestone grasslands, are just getting covered in scrub. And so conservation volunteers go and cut all the scrub down, and they have a big fire, and it all goes up into the atmosphere. And you think, well, it's a waste, all that heat and all that energy. Plus, we've got things like roadside verges that are being cut, and the trees on the verges. And there's a huge amount of biomass out there. Bracken, gorse, all these species that are problems for a lot of nature reserves are just being cut, and it's too expensive to cut them sometimes, so it doesn't happen. So a lot of our nature reserves are being degraded just for the fact that biomass has no value typically. So I felt actually maybe pyrolysis and creation of biochar could tackle that problem and give some of these types of biomass a bit of a value and encourage them to be collected. So that was my inspiration to push for the local authority to get into this and to create a business case. Now we're also looking at things like green waste as feedstock and other areas which I think actually has also got merit, and diverting any kind of biomass from landfill is extremely important, of course, as well.
12.4 million tonne per year now of basic household green waste, which is a large amount.
That's a large amount to go out.
A large amount being released into the atmosphere, rotting away.
Yeah. So you look at the carbon markets as well at the minute, and there's people putting huge amounts into direct air capture and stuff like that, and they're delivering hardly anything. And so the carbon markets, they're all buying biochar stuff because that's the only stuff that's available, but they are still buying pre-credits in other areas, thinking there's going to be some other technological miracle that's going to come along, and why not just stick with what's working right now and invest in the biochar.
Brilliant. So Mick, why biochar? How did you get it? How did you end up getting involved in biochar?
It was an accident. I just an article came up on my phone. I don't even know why. I was probably just surfing and it came up and I read it. I thought, that's interesting. Read a bit more, and then I knew from experience that Betty, our pyrolysis plant, had produced biochar in the past by accident, or what looked like biochar to me. So I thought, let's just see if we can actually produce it. So we did. I tried to produce it very easily. And at that time I was looking at the carbon markets, and from when I first looked, I think in February up until August, it had lifted from 20 to 50 pound a tonne. So I thought, this is interesting. Now it's not enough to make it really financially viable. We already had a plant. I got land, so I thought, right, well, let's produce some and see what happens, which we did. Produce some biochar, put it on the land. Saw the effect, particularly with clover, which then sort of was a light bulb moment for me, because I thought if I can make our clover grow better, then I will get more nitrogen sequestration and we will get bigger crops, because we're already regenerative farming. And fundamentally, that's what's happened. The last 2 to 3 years, I've learned more and more and more about it. Also understood how to produce biochar in a more consistent, higher level fashion. For instance, our first effort was, I think, a HC ratio of 0.4. That won't mean a lot, but that means it was done at fairly low temperatures and probably had a life of a few hundred years. And then our last year's efforts was at 0.1, which is at the very, very top. So and that really brought home to me the value of producing high quality biochar, and not just biochar, because when you do your LCA with a HC of 0.4, it's 1.4 ton of CO2 equivalent per ton biochar. At 0.1, it's over 2.3. So it was a real big thing for us. So that's where we are, and the journey continues. We always, with the new plant we've got developed now, coming online in joint with Shropshire, it's going to be really exciting come the end of the year when we can really take it to the next level, both in quantity and quality.
Brilliant. And Connor, same question to you. How do you get involved in this journey?
Well, by accident as well. So I've always wanted to do something in business, and then when I turned 17, I learned about climate change for the first time. It was 11 years ago now. And it really woke me up, and I thought, well, I can't just make any old business, I have to work on this problem. And so I went to study product design at university, and in my final year, you had to spend the year basically picking a problem and then spending the whole year designing a solution to it. And I was trying to find an idea, and I went to the Society Open Day, and there was a permaculture society. And so I got talking to that guy. He was studying biochar for his ecology degree, and he asked me to build him a biochar kiln because he heard I was a product designer. So he thought, oh, you could probably get an oil drum and cut and weld it and make me a kiln. And then I went home and I looked up what biochar was because I didn't really know what it was. And then I found out it was carbon negative with all these co-benefits. And I was like, well, why is this not, wider spoken about in more circles? And this was in October 2017.
So you're a veteran.
I'm a veteran.
UK biochar.
And at that time, we didn't have the IPCC or the Royal Society or the British government putting their name behind it and saying, no, this is verifiably sensible thing to do. So I thought maybe it's like snake oil or something. I was a bit worried about it, but it turned out to be real. So I ended up designing a small-scale biochar kiln for my dissertation because I Googled biochar kiln for sale and no products came up. And I just said it to my tutor, like, oh yeah, there's this biochar thing. And she was like, yeah, that sounds really interesting, do it. And then I learned how to make biochar on a small scale, and then made a product that you can actually buy off the shelf, so you don't have to cut and weld an oil drum. You can just, like, you want to buy a pizza oven or make a pizza oven. You didn't have that choice for biochar for smallholders. So yeah, that's how I got into biochar. Designed a small scale kiln, showed it to everyone's mums at the degree show, and they were like, oh, can I buy one? Can I buy one? And I thought, well, maybe this is the business I've been looking for. And then I did a grow test. So I made some biochar in my kiln, and I was going to plant some radish plants on my windowsill to prove that my kiln makes good biochar. And when I was ringing around asking for free compost, on the 4th or 5th rejection, the guy was like, what do you need it for? And I said, oh, have you heard of biochar? He's like, no, come round and tell me more. So I cycle round to his facility, and he does 100,000 plants for Bournemouth Pool and Christchurch Council. Mm-hmm. And he says, I'll run your grow test for you, but we'll do it on 400 bedding plants. So I was delighted. I cycled home, made biochar in my kiln for 3 days straight, made compost tea, mixed the two things together, and then I took it to his nursery, and we just took 7 litres of biochar for every 70-litre bag of compost that he was using and mixing out and potting up his seedlings. And then I came back 3 weeks later, and he didn't say anything. He just said, come with me. And I was terrified that I would have introduced diseases into his nursery, all sorts, but he says, oh, I reckon you sped up the plant's growth by about a week. And then we took the roots out and we looked at the ones, this is the front page of Earthly Biochar's website. You got white, thick and hairy roots with the biochar, and you've got thin brown roots with the control. And he was blown away by that and said, can I have a yearly supply? And then when I tried to buy that yearly supply, I realised that the industry was not there. Mm. So that's when we pivoted to how do we build the UK's biochar production infrastructure. And then I found Woodtech on page 10 of Google, and here we are.
It's a good experience. So follow on from that. Next question is your biochar journey. I want you to share an experience or project related to biochar you worked on. Please don't miss out any failures, mistakes, all the good details, please. Just pick one. You go first, Mick. One experience or project you worked on which was just stands out for you as a memorable experience.
I would say the one closest to my heart really was funny enough, going back to the field that we started with. because our journey was, okay, the biochar works, what are we going to do with it now? So then the idea was, well, we'll mix it with the bedding of the cattle that winter, next winter, and then doing that we will, get 2 bites of the cherry. I was figuring if I got the biochar in the bedding, it would probably improve the health of the cattle, which it did, and then would probably improve the value of the manure at the end of the year. So what we do, we traditionally clean the cattle shed out in the spring and then spread it in the autumn when it's rotted. And we couldn't believe the first year, when we come to spread it, it was like compost, not cattle manure. It had completely rotted down. And when we put it on the field, the clover and all in September now just went crazy. And then the growth we had in the spring was like nothing I've seen before. So we went and bought a little microbiometer, so you could actually do a field test to just see what your microbes were. We just saw it online, we thought that could be useful, so we bought that. And that was actually the light bulb moment, because when we actually did the field tests, we had at least 4 or 5 times more microbes in our soil than our neighbours did, and you could see the difference in the growth. And I do feel I was a bit lucky that year because the weather conditions were right. It was dry enough, so the manure rotted down in an aerobic fashion, which was perfect. So I actually stumbled on a really good result, and now I'm just working on how to replicate that even in more difficult times. But that is to me the ultimate experience I've had with biochar.
Okay. Dan, memorable experience or anything? Do biochar?
I suppose I make some.
Anything, or?
Well, no. I think it's. I've made small amounts myself. I've got a little stove. It's like a rocket stove made by carbon farmers in Clearby, Mortimer sort of way. Which it's a great little stove, and so I've made my own biochar with that and put it in my compost. What I do like actually about that is that you can just leave it somewhere where there's a in a fridge or in a storeroom, or you put it on your compost and it just takes the smells away, and you're thinking it's really you kind of can feel that it's an active substance. It's not just it will take things on and it's got a certain magic to it like
That's
that.
exactly what we saw with the manures. It was like suddenly we went to odor-free farming. There was no smell.
You think, what are those odours? It's good stuff. It's going,
ammonia.
but it's nitrogen, isn't it? It's getting away.
Well, like I say, I went to an event the other day when it was all about how do we control ammonia emissions in farming.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there thinking, hang on a minute. If we don't create ammonia in the first place, we haven't got to control it.
Yeah.
And by going one stage further and introducing the biochar into the manure at the early stage and soaking up the ammonia, then you don't have ammonia problems.
Yeah, and people are replacing that ammonia with artificial fertilisers. It takes huge amounts of energy to produce and releases loads of CO2. So it's the perfect thing for the circular economy. I mean, my journey is going in so many sort of tangents, and that's what I like about it really, is that more you look into it, the more potential applications there are.
Basically, close your eyes and throw biochar over your head somewhere, and it's probably going to have an
it'll
effect.
do something. You can put it in lime mortar in wine cellars. It keeps the humidity right. You can turn it into graphite and use it in car batteries, or you can use it for electromagnetic shielding, and you can there's so many different avenues, and it's difficult to kind of focus in. What I do like is that I found the right people in Shropshire Council who kind of got it. It took a little while for them to get it. It's just great. I mean, for me, that moment when people like him and people like assistant director level kind of get it and they think, okay, let's go for it. And that's just been great to actually have that support. And I'm still on that journey. So when we get the first machine up and running and producing some biochar, that's going to be great. But
Yeah. Scarlett, you got another story to add to your cycling biochar production story, or?
Yeah, I mean, just you made me think of something. So my mum has a little compost kitchen caddy, and I remember at the time when I was living there, put a bit of biochar on the bottom, empty, put a bit of food waste on, a bit more biochar, bit of food waste, a bit of biochar, and then usually when it's full, it absolutely stinks and it's full of liquid and it's just methane everywhere and it's just an unpleasant experience. But when I did this, I literally just put my head on it and took a deep breath, and it was just no smells, hardly any liquids.
Yeah.
I was like, this is making composting easier for people, and then what's it doing to the methane emissions? So that was a really...
You got it right on the nose there. I call it composting for dummies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Biochar makes composting much easier.
Yeah. I mean, my latest approach at the moment is to... I'm going to a lot of master composters. Just saying, if you haven't heard of this before, most of them actually have, because they're just so into composting they've probably heard of it, but lots of them haven't used it. So I'm getting a lot of interest from the master composting community saying, okay, can we trial this and give it a go? So I think the more we can kind of educate as many people as possible, and I'm hoping to get schools using stoves. Might buy a couple of yours if if we can get the funding. So yeah, so if we can get forest schools making their own biochar and taking it home, if the parents have got compost caddies, that sort of stuff, I think it's just it gets people interested, doesn't it? And they start looking into it.
I mean, it's quite funny. All three of you said, although completely different backgrounds, starting off in biochar, your like an experience you remember was to do with the smell. So that's the goes when you take this product, you give that to Mick, and stick your nose in there, and Mick will tell you what it is.
Can I have a sniff of that? Tell me what it is.
Looks like licorice.
Yeah.
It's some sort of animal bedding.
You really get your nose in there deep, because...
Do you know what that is? That's 2/3 chicken muck.
Is it?
1/3 biochar.
That's amazing.
Dried and pelleted.
Yeah.
If I put
So
2/3
raw
of chicken muck in a jar, you wouldn't get your
raw
nose
chicken
in it,
muck
would you?
in there.
Yeah. That's
2/3 raw chicken muck.
yeah.
And that was made about 2 years ago, yeah?
Yeah.
Is it?
That's like a plastic material.
It is.
It's amazing.
Well, they do use it as a plastic alternative.
Well,
made of air
that
company.
would be fantastic for distributing as a organic fertilizer on arable seams.
Yeah.
But it needs the investment to put the plant in, which should be happening hopefully soon. But that was one idea we had to really push forward, sorting a lot of the poultry manure problems out in the 7Y. Would be to pelletize it and then ship it out.
Yeah.
But the stabilisation of the biochar in with the poultry manure was, well, as you can see, no smell.
Yeah.
And there's no one I've come across and said there's raw poultry muck in there.
Yeah.
I found another historical use of charcoal, granted, but when a king died in battle, they needed to transport his body back to England or whatever.
Yeah.
And they obviously didn't want it to rot, so they would fill the coffin with charcoal.
Oh, really?
And it would slow down the degradation of... I mean, it's a bit of a dark story, but that's another one.
Blimey.
I don't think
All the
we'll be
juices.
bothering pushing that line of use. So
But I mean, people are having their ashes mixed with a cement and put in the ocean.
Yeah.
It's a very...
I think when I go, I think I'm going to have to be pyrolyzed.
I'm going to say
cremated.
maybe we just get
Yeah.
pyrolyzed now instead of cremated.
That's right.
Instead of a donor card, you could have like a...
Well, they do the carbon and turn them into diamonds, don't they? Have you heard of that? And they kind of...
Well, spread it on the land. You could be some use.
Yeah,
exactly.
Very much used in life, but it's using something after life.
Like damn chicken muffin.
Yeah.
I need to promote it.
It's good to be useful after work,
Yeah. Spread it back on Shropshire as well. It's Shropshire Dan.
Shropshire brewing, Shropshire bread,
Shropshire spread.
Ashes to ashes.
Shropshire spread. Yeah, right, okay.
Serious turn now, biochar ethics. How can it go wrong? Are there ethical considerations in the production and use of biochar? So how are you first, Connor?
Yeah, so I think if you're looking at this through the lens of economics and you're just trying to make money, you're going to go down paths which end up causing negative unintended consequences. So, I mean, I regularly get contacted by biochar companies that they're about to switch on a brand new plant and they want me to sell all of their stuff. And I ask them, how do they make the biochar? And they say G30 virgin wood chip. So they're not taking residues, they're taking a living tree and cutting it down just to make into biochar, where you're releasing half of the carbon instantly just in the process of making it. So from a carbon perspective, it would have been better to let that tree stay standing. So that you do hedgerow trimming. So this is something which is happening every 3 years anyway. You go to plantations of monoculture pines where they plant it and then they don't do any thinning, so they're essentially just a waste of money. And then you'll go and do some thinning, improve the health of the forest, and you've got all this biomass that you can then sequester the carbon of. So you have to think creatively with
Yeah, it's got to be forest. I would say forest residues, field boundary maintenance. And you've got to remember is if you do a field boundary maintenance and you might look, you've given it a fairly big haircut this year, 3 years time, you won't even know you've been in there. It comes back so fast. The speed of recovery of hedgerows and field boundary is so fast that it's much faster than forest grown carbon. So we can actually speed the sequestration of carbon and put it away safe in the bank. It's a bit like when you're doing, what's that game when you go so far and you say bank and then you say bank, and if you don't bank it you end up with nothing. Which is the same with wood, because it grows, it dies, it rots, or it goes on fire. So it's a bit like growing a wood and that's it. But as you go in, you say bank, it grows again, bank, and it grows again, bank. And by this time you've sequestered all the wood that trees would have grown for 1,000 years, and they're still growing. And I feel that's the only way we can actually achieve our targets or help achieve the targets, is by keeping it in a short rotation and keep banking it all the time.
And
things like coppicing.
I don't know why coppicing isn't flagged up more in terms of carbon sequestration. I think people are so obsessed with planting new trees that don't do any sequestration for the first 10 years or so, or hardly any. Why not just better manage our existing woodlands, or like you say, look at
when we started going, I mean, the farm here were 115 acres roughly. And we're about 10% of that now is woodland with some extra plantation, but in general, the original woodland, especially by the stream, it was so overgrown and so needing TLC. And going in and taking the material out of biochar, we just completely. So before it was so dark and like a Stephen King novel basically, and then take it all out, give it a haircut, as you say. First you get the insects, then you get the birds. Well, by year 2, it's like Disney princesses singing there and all the birds are flying around.
And if you're constantly rotating what parts you're cutting and working on in your ecological area, you've always got plants and flowers and shrubs and berries to support your nature, and the nature's got wings and legs, and it can go a small distance to find new habitats. So it becomes we've seen a massive uplift in the amount of bird life and all wildlife on our farm since we started doing the limited planting that we do. And we have got some on short rotational basis, but most of what we planted was before we started doing biochar, so it was actually planted to produce a really nice standard tree of very high quality. I do feel like a lot of planting that goes on in the nature in the name of carbon sequestration is just going to be left, and it'll be not great woodland. It's just going
not good woodland to manage and get into.
Because they get the money early on, and then they think, oh well, that's done now.
It'll just be left, and it'll come to nothing. In about 30 years' time, it'll stop growing, which is sad, because instead of producing, say, 1 hectare having 150 tonne of carbon sequestration, it'll be stuck at 50 because of lack of management. But because it seems to be, if you plant under these schemes, you're not allowed to touch it. I have been told that if a tree falls down, you've got to leave it there. You're not allowed to take it out. So I just feel a lot of these projects, especially in the UK, are ill thought out in the sense that they're not thinking about, can we utilise what we have to make energy? Can we heat things? What can we do with this? How can we benefit our total environment?
There is a benefit. I mean, you touched upon taking wood out of a degraded woodland, clearing it versus leaving it there. I mean, we obviously do need to leave some wood left into the ecosystem to feed the fungus and everything. So we wouldn't say, just take every single bit of scrap.
No. So you always leave your either your very good trees or your very bad trees, but it's the understory that you manage. If you leave enough openness in the canopy, you will be growing understory all the time while you're still growing your prime trees, and those prime trees will ultimately grow and sequester more carbon if they were allowed to grow than they would be if they were just left in a real thick environment.
I would add as well that there are some woods that are just primal dark woods that don't need coppicing. But I think because most of our woodlands have been used in the past, you get quite a lot of even-aged woods, and they definitely need sort of management to sort of restructure the sort of age class of trees. And so, but I think there are a few places where you think actually it's a complete no-go zones.
I can't believe I didn't know about coppicing when I first learned about environmentalism and climate change years ago. I only recently learned about it, and people don't understand it, that if you have a hazel, if you let that grow for, 80, 100 years, it will get so tall that the wind will blow, pull its roots out, and then you've got a dead tree. Whereas if you come every 15 years or every 7 years and you're cutting that stump at an angle so that the water can run off it, you do it in the winter where the sap's down, you get 5 new shoots coming, and then you've kept that hazel tree living way longer than it would have without you.
But you have to remember that over 30% of the carbon in that tree is in the roots. So when you take the other 60% away, you've got a rootstock capable of growing that really rapidly. So the regrowth is much quicker than the growth would have been if you left it carry on. Once it gets, a hazel for instance, gets to about 10 or 15 years, it slows down. So by cutting it, in the 10 years to 15 years to get to where it was again, it will have grown twice as much carbon as it would have done if you'd left it. So you've had your carbon that you've sequestered in the bank, and you haven't impacted the amount of carbon sequestration you're going to do whatsoever.
What other ways have you seen it going wrong with biochar production, especially machinery and emissions?
My biggest worry is that you'll get, one of the things we designed into the C1000 is that it has its own independent biochar meter. It tells you how much it's made. So that's like another sign off to say in 12 months we've made 800 tonne of biochar. So your record keeping for your carbon sequestration should be in that ballpark zone. Whereas they're unscrupulous. I feel there is some area for some unscrupulous operators to fudge it a bit.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful on that. Also, it's the same as the qualities. I think we have to have a really good. We have to self-police it really well. Really have to do. Because bad operated biochar plants will produce very bad biochar.
And potentially more greenhouse gas emissions in sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide.
Yes, there is a potentials for that, but there's also potential for if you don't fully char your product, you can end up with some not very nice elements in it.
Some carcinogenic compounds.
Yes, that will happen if you don't get a full char. So it's quite important that all that is taken into account. Especially, I'm not knocking the small batch kilns, but that is where a lot of the problems will arise. And I'm not naming any names, but one truck did come in here to pick up some biochar, and it was already half loaded. So I just jumped up to have a look, and to be honest, I was not impressed. It was a lot of it was
biochar coming from another place.
It was half charred, a lot of it.
And why is half charring bad? Like, what is it that actually like?
Well, you've got your PAH, it condenses back into it.
You get polyaromatic hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
That's
Well done.
Polyaromatic.
You're the first person alive to attempt that in the history of UK biochar.
Let's get it right.
That's an easy one.
But it's not all bad, because there's a suite of 16, 8 are carcinogenic and 8 are not carcinogenic. So the 8 that are not carcinogenic will oxidize in the soil very quickly and disappear. But the 8 that are carcinogenic are a big concern. However, in my experience of biochar production and all the testing we've done, we haven't seen any issue of the 8 carcinogenic ones coming at all. So they're fairly easy to stay on top of.
What about dust? How can you get it really badly with moisture content and dust of biochar?
Well, my solution to that was simple: just have it wet.
Yeah.
Not very good for you once to sell it in plastic paper bags, but certainly it's 100% dust free and 100% fire risk free. So that was easy. But that's where we started. We're starting from a very, very wet point, as opposed to a very dry point. And we also, this test must be done. I ask you this question: does the biochar being quenched in water end up with a biochar that has a more open structure than one is cooled in nitrogen.
When I looked into it, if you have biochar made in a retort where you've got it's not in the presence of flame, so the sort of char itself it never touches the flame, and also there's never any water that quenches it. It's just starves it with oxygen. It puts itself out. If you take that versus a biochar made in my small kiln or biochar made with a water quenching, the water quenched biochar is hydrophilic, so it absorbs water, whereas the biochar that's made in a retort is hydrophobic until you wash the tars out of it, until you process it.
So that's why you talk about activating your biochar when it comes out of a retort, because I always felt this, because when I was looking at a lot of results of people, universities doing studies and everything, I'm thinking, why are they not having the results we're seeing? But explaining what you're explaining sort of explains it to a degree. So all biochars are not even.
How does it work in your small kiln? Is it water quenched at the end?
Yeah, so mine's a T-load, which is top lit updraft. You can just type into YouTube, you'll get all these oil barrel designs. And it kind of burns in a way that a cigarette burns. So you've basically got like no air can come in the side, only air can come in from the base, and you like fill it up with wood chip, and then you light it from the top, and it will burn downwards through your wood chip, and it will like burn towards where the air's coming. Yeah. And when it reaches the end of the wood chip, everything above it is low oxygen pyrolysis zone.
I see, yeah.
And when you've fully carbonised it, your flame changes colour, so it goes from like orange to a blue colour. And then when you see blue, you just pour water on from the top. That creates steam, which I think helps flush out the pores and improves the quality of it even further.
Yeah, so I mean that is.
I mean, to me, one of the things you've got to be aware of as well is that once, if this industry does kick off, you will get people putting all sorts of rubbish through them. You know, I mean, that has to be kind of, again, self-police, but also other regulators should come in and check that you're not putting too much heavy metals or whatever. I mean, we've seen some results, haven't we, from some green waste
from different councils, completely different to yours.
Exactly. So I think there's always going to be that concern that you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out to a certain extent. But what I like about it is that you can put some of this stuff. It has got the microplastics in, and actually pyrolysis will clean it up really. So as long as there's no heavy metals or things like that can spoil a batch, I think.
And that's where the soil test. That's where the biochar testing comes in. If you're switching feedstocks, you don't know
exactly.
You send it to a lab, you get it analysed.
Yeah, that's a classic of the compost tailing. So after you've composted it, then you haven't got the fines, then you should not have the heavy metal issue, but you do have a lot of microplastics, and biochar is a perfect solution for that. The position hasn't been decided yet where that's going to sit on. It's probably going to end up being urban or material, I would think. I very much doubt they will approve it for agricultural, simply because, as you said, there's too much variability.
Yeah,
but that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah.
If waste goes to material or for urban use, then that's fine. There's not a problem with that. Does not need to go into agriculture. I do not believe agriculture is the highest price or highest value for biochar. I think it has the highest value for societal good. But I don't know where it's all going to sit. Monetarily, I don't think it's going to sit where it needs to sit. I don't think we'll struggle to get biochar at a price break that makes a mass uptake in agriculture unless we're using agricultural residues to produce our biochar.
Okay, so I mean, one thing about this podcast, the reason for doing it, it's a growth on where we've already been releasing videos and information for free, because we want people to learn from our mistakes really. And we'll definitely look at doing an episode about how biochar could go wrong. And especially I think once we have our wet flue gas scrubbing system set here, certainly showing on a large scale of production we have continuous emission monitoring system here as well, and we'll do live feeds of exactly how it's working, and we can show the difference of changing things.
Turning it on and turning it off, so you actually see instantly that if you haven't got abatement, that's what you're pushing out.
Our sort of next stage wet flue gas scrubbing system up and running, which will probably be mid-September, and then we'll do maybe we'll do it with a cherry picker above the flue, since we're so confident in our emissions. We'll we'll see if we survive the whole
Send a
length of the
child.
podcast. Yeah, got the whole family up there.
Yeah.
So we'll do another whole episode in the future on where biochar can go on, because it's not just about educating on what biochar can do and how we're doing it. I also want to tell people how not to do it, because a lot of people are putting machines in it, never even run it. A biomass boiler, never mind the wastewood biomass boilers we operate in the UK. And
There's always been a few
when
really
did you
bad
first
stories.
run your own biomass boiler?
1985, 84.
So he's coming up on 40 years experience of this, and that was
Completely
using
transferable
waste.
skills.
Yeah.
So last question, what is holding biochar back in the UK? Who would like to go first on that one?
I can start.
Yeah, for Connor.
So the more I've looked into this, and you've run the profit and loss, we've looked at how much capital expenditure you need to buy a biochar plant and all the equipment, and you look at your operating costs and you do the maths and you get a payback period which is over 5 years. And if you're looking at biochar purely through the lens of economics as to make money and revenue in the short term, it's not right for you. But if you're like us and you value the things that are hard to measure, like the environmental side and the social side, then you know that biochar adds up. But it's just difficult to put that in a profit and loss and then convince the investors and the banks to do this when they're only measuring through that one narrow lens of economics. I think that's holding biochar back, is struggling to value those hard to measure things. But when you meet the right people with the right sort of long-term thinking and they get it, then they're on board.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think it's important that from a local authority point of view, we can borrow quite at low rates, and we can. I think there's definitely a role for local authorities to get on board with this, because it's got so they are the people that should be sort of leading the way and in some ways and just showing that this has all those knock-on benefits. I mean, we've got so many ways that we could benefit. So, for example, if biochar is shown to hold, nitrates and phosphates and things like that on the land, it stops it getting into the rivers. We've got loads of developments in Shropshire that, as a local planning authority, we have targets for housing development. We're not hitting those targets because there's too much nitrates and phosphates in the rivers. So, if we can demonstrate that biochar widespread use in some of these catchments could reduce that, then it will enable us to hit our housing targets. So there's all sorts of weird ways it can do that. And similarly for the aerial emissions of pollutants, the ammonia we've talked about before, if that can reduce that, then we can encourage more rural businesses and allow our housing targets to be hit. So I think there's loads of other interest from other local authorities. So I think that we need to sort of lead the way and show that it can be done. And yes, there's a huge initial outlay, but actually, if it pays itself back over 5 years, we can do it.
It's chicken and egg, because there are so many core benefits of biochar in various uses that will add to its value. But because it's not being done yet, it hasn't added to the value.
Yeah.
Like you said,
Exactly.
you do this, you do that into the farming community in there, they buy into it, they get their economics work well, if not better. And then as the offshoot of that, you then reduce your nitrates and phosphate runoff, which then means in the local area they can then do your development that you need to do. And suddenly for our local authority, Shropshire or the council, you can put the net benefit is so big that the value of the biochar, it's either going to be paid for by whoever's using it, or there's another way of making it work.
Yeah,
carbon is one of the key elements here. It's about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, we're still looking at this. Our venture into pyrolysis and biochar is predominantly about tackling our climate emissions.
Yeah,
we've got a target for 2030. There's no way we're going to reach that target unless we have some significant carbon negative action. And I think that pyrolysis and biochar is the most promising one.
Do you think another thing that's holding biochar back is that we went away from mixed farms, and what you're seeing here is having cows and something on the field. Biochar, you can buy it once, use it in your cows, and then use it again in your fields.
Yeah.
if you haven't got animals and it's next to the arable, you don't get that benefit, meaning your payback on the biochar is much longer.
Arable is going to be much more difficult because without the, as stupid as it sounds, key elements, and I look at is biochar, biomass for compost, and some animal manure, and you need all three to make what you need to go totally very high production, regenerative, healthy farming.
Yeah, there's a story I learned from a German biochar company. They were saying that in order for them to sell biochar for 400, they sell it for 400 euros a tonne, and then they sell the carbon credit to subsidise that cost.
Yeah.
They say that they can say to a farmer, if you buy biochar at this price and use it in your animal bedding first, and then on your arables, you get a return on investment after 4 years. So the money you spent on the biochar, you will then get it back, and then a little bit more after 4 years. And once they tell that story to them, they're able to convince them to do it. But I'm thinking, how can we learn from this here? Do we have enough mixed farms? Probably not.
Even just if you talk to a farmer, I think it's £250 an acre to reseed. Well, suddenly using half a tonne of biochar in an acre, it makes a really big difference. As a one-off hit, doesn't really be too much of an issue. So it's not like you're using it half a tonne every year. But if we can bring the biochar, as I said, from farm residues and understand the nutrient cycling of it, then we will be much better off, because if poultry manure, for instance, that will produce a really low-cost biochar with massive benefits, but we don't know where the phosphate is going to land yet, how leaching is going to be, etc., etc. We don't know that. But it might be that the biochar process at high temperature locks up the phosphate, and it does not become an issue.
Yeah.
You know, but these things science doesn't know. It hasn't. You know, this is what's holding biochar back. Will be a lot of scientific work to be done with the local universities and academia to actually answer these very, very important questions.
I think it is great that you're both a producer of biochar and a farmer, because I mean that's so key. I think there is a lot of research going on in biochar, isn't it? In lots of universities all over the place, but their research doesn't often really get out into the field. And what I'm really keen on promoting is more and more of these kind of field trials and coupling that with universities. So we're doing the field trial at the moment with the poultry farmers, sticking it in the poultry sheds to see if it does absorb ammonia. And I
think researchers and universities have to be aware that if they make biochar in a metal pot with a hole in it in their oven, and then do all their analysis on that, and then say that biochar does X, Y, and Z, but then you've got biochar made in a wood tech kiln, completely different production process, different biochar.
Also you can't replicate in the field what you got in the lab. One of the positive things about biochar, it will get rid of the nitrogen. We know that, so you can take the nitrogen element, and the nitrate pollution from animal manures is one of our biggest problems. So we know biochar can head that off at the valley straight away.
But presumably that has to be that type of biochar that's been kind of quenched.
Commercially representative biochar. They need to be buying it from your machine, essentially. The machines that people are actually going to use, because no one's going to use a lab type machine in reality on a farm.
Anyway.
So, pretty much all the questions we had.
And
just to sort of finish off with a sort of final discussion is, so our biochar going to land has a long-term effect on carbon within the soil. So I'd like you to discuss that, because it is impossible to quantify that. So at the moment, when you look at your LCA, you end up with about 2.4 tonne carbon per 1 tonne of biochar. And there's probably no way you can quantify it, but what is your sort of, what's your opinion about that?
Well, straight away, when you put the biochar on the soil, that is a definitive amount of carbon going in that soil, and depending on your HC ratio, you're pretty sure how long it's going to be in the soil. That has been researched many times over, and they are pretty specific in where you are with that. One of the big things that is an unknown is that if you are then utilising the biochar to move to regenerative farming and enhancing regenerative farming, enhancing your soil microbes, so you buy into the whole biological concept, then we don't really know what level of extra carbon per hectare you can sequester into the soil in living organic carbon in the bacteria and the microbes. But it can be an increase of topside of 10 tonne per hectare every year.
Do you think biochar is accelerating the benefits of regenerative agriculture?
Definitely, especially the carbon side of it, because it definitely enhances the fungal side, and the fungal biomass mass is much bigger than the bacterial biomass mass. And then when the fungi biomass mass gets bigger, then your arthropods, worms and nematodes multiply as well. So then your actual tonnage of living organisms in the soil gets bigger and bigger. As long as you can maintain that, that is our fastest route to getting carbon capture out of the air. It's not permanent. One part of it's permanent, but the other part of it is here and now, and it's a here and now that is important. The here and now is more important. The 10 tonne of here and now is a damn sight more important than 1 tonne of 1,000 year.
Seems crazy.
So do you think if we're putting biochar soil amendments on farms and we want to measure, we should really do a baseline soil carbon assessment?
Yeah.
And then come back in 10 years' time?
Not even 2
5
years'
years'
time, even next year, even 6 months. You can increase the soil carbon, you can increase the microbial content in your soil so fast, it's beyond your imagination. Puts tree plant into the shade. You plant a hectare with trees. After 10 years, you might have got a tonne of carbon captured, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. But that, if you got your soil microbiology up as well as doing the tree planting, you would have already added 30, 40 tonne to it. So the biochar can just act as a catalyst that kicks that off. I would just like to add one little thing on biochar. I always thought of this, before mankind there was massive wildfires. They would envelop countries because there's nothing to put them out. And what happens after a wildfire? Loads of biochar. So biochar is not alien in any force. The whole development of the world's ecology has been based as part of biochar, has been part of it, and that's why I think fungi really benefit when there's biochar in the area, because they've got no growth competition and they've got this element that they can really feed on and become the dominative force after a wildfire. So I think biochar is just taking us back a few thousand years to when wildfires were in existence.
And you just harnessed it now and put it in a machine.
Yeah, we find a way of making it ourselves. And I also think it has a profound effect on the trace elements that are within the wood and biomass as well, because of the heat treatment makes it more available to the microbes.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Brilliant. That's a wrap, I think.
Look out for the next episode where, as a family business, we sit down and discuss the story of Betty, the pilot Woodtech biochar plant, soon to be retired in place of our new C1000. From early trials to producing EBC-grade biochar, developing emissions technology for using waste feedstocks, and generating electricity. And perhaps I will convince Mick to tell the story of when he blew his foot up whilst experimenting with NOx reduction technology. The struggles and the difficulties most will not admit to, along with the good parts of our 5-year journey